Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. I'm Biola Lavi.
I'm Tundra Abiola.
And I'm Veronica Odeka.
Our first guest, retired Colonel Muhammad Mustafa Abdallah, is the chairman and chief executive of National Drug Law Enforcement Agency. He attended government secondary school, Abuja, before joining the Nigeria Defense Academy. He studied law at Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria, where he got his first and second degrees before rounding off at Nigerian Law School with a Bachelor of Law. Colonel Abdallah received professional Abdallah received professional and policy training from institutions in Nigeria and Lebanon and has visited 27 other countries in the course of his military career, including Egypt, South Africa, France, Japan, Thailand, United Kingdom, and the United States. He has also attended several international conferences, including heads of National Drug Law Enforcement in Africa Conference, International Drug Enforcement Conference, Asia Pacific Drug Enforcement Conference, United Nations Commission on Narcotics, Drugs, and Interpol. The NDLEA chief executive has now joined us to look at what his agency has been doing to win the war against illicit drugs in Nigeria. Good morning and welcome to the show, sir.
Good morning, ma'am.
To give you an opportunity to just sort of give us a lay of the land and a sense of where we are today when it comes to the fight against illicit drugs and especially the fight against trafficking. Where are we as a country and what work has the NDLEA been doing to actually crack down and make sure, especially on the use of illicit drugs in Nigeria? Give us a little sense of what your agency has been doing and what are some of your wins that you would like to talk about?
Let me put the year question in some perspective. You need to remember that the agency was set up like some 28 years ago. Then the population of Nigeria was certainly less than 180 million that is reputed to be now. Essentially then, the agency had been working with the tools and resources that were set up from 28 years ago. I assume you live in Nigeria, in some part of Lagos. I assume in your neighborhood, you see the prevalence of engagements that people in drug abuse. The question I'd like to ask is whether in your neighborhood you think with a staff strength of about 5,000, that is adequate to check and halt all the drug abuse, let alone the trafficking that goes in Nigeria. But I can tell you, with the staff that I have, with the training that they have, they are doing a yeoman's job. They have never relented, and they haven't given up. If you come back to, closer home to Africa, I don't think there's an agency that does drug interdiction in the whole continent that does it better than Nigeria.
So, I mean, this is actually quite concerning what you flagged up, the fact that you have a staff strength of 5,000 to service a country the size of Nigeria, especially a country with 65% of its population under the age of 35. And yes, you are right, I live in Lagos, and I have seen an increased use of illicit drugs on the streets. It is something we see every day. There are a number of reports that have been happening. Do you believe that the way we're currently handling drugs in Nigeria, the high criminal, I mean, drugs, the use of drugs is criminalized, and your agency, with the shorthandedness you have, what work is your agency doing with government officials and also around rehabilitating these young people that are now have been falling to the use of drugs for other reasons, which we'll talk about later in this interview?
Let's take them sequentially. First, let's talk about the manpower. I have told you for the past 28 years, we have, the agency has been serviced by 5,000 persons. That is why President Muhammad Buhari saw the death of manpower and approved recruitment of 15,000 more persons to be able to augment the shortfall in NDLEA manpower. Secondly, in the mandate of the agency, there are two basic types. The drug interdiction, which deals with the arrest, prosecution, and sentencing by the courts, of course. And the other mandate is the drug demand reduction, which entails counseling, rehabilitating, and reintegrating drug abusers so that they can become useful persons in the community that they left or that they seem to have been drifting away from. I would like to tell you straight here that much as the interdiction part of the agency's work is what you see, the demand reduction component of it has largely been laid dormant because it comes with a cost that is more than that of interdiction. This requires special institutions. They are not hospitals per se, that they require special services to rendered by professionals. So how do you do it? You need to have whatever you call it, but you shouldn't be hospitals so that you don't stigmatize the people. But we do not have any standard government such institutions in Nigeria. What you have is the minor things that the NDLEA can do on its own by the different commands to attempt at counseling and rehabilitation. Then you have the private sector participation who do the best that they can, but even they are not the standard ones. And I tell you, the cost ranges from 500,000 to $1 million a month. I do not know how many Nigerians can afford that. But by the way, there are only two ways you can tackle the drug conundrum. Physically, by boots on the ground. The other alternative is by technology. I think the president has started the first one by putting more boots on the ground, which I hope will be recruiting very quickly. But then technology can do some of the parts that we have largely lagged behind.
Just to follow up on your point about the duties of the NDLEA, firstly, you're also charged with recovery of drug-related proceeds. How successful has that been? And also, we often read of NDLEA arrests and drug busts. What is your conviction rate?
95%, I can tell you straight ahead. They are the only ones that we miss. A few that said struck out by the court for not even technicalities, because you are in Nigeria, you very much know what the law is, what the costs are. I'll give you a simple example. For instance, the Bolivians, the first ones we arrested with the production of a meth lab in Lagos, it took us the better part of 6 years to go through the courts. By the time they were ready for conviction, the judge said he had sentenced them to 6 years. So what do you think? It means that by the time we took them through the court processes, they had served their time. Before we could file appeal, they had gone. But you can contrast that to a lady that was arrested in Lagos. It took another lady judge to try her in 3 weeks and sentence her to 20 years. So if you want to talk about conviction rate, you have also to bring the cost and see how much they try to work with us. But our race, we have some of the best lawyers, I can tell you.
Congratulations on that.
We do our cases ourselves. We don't outsource. Thank you very much.
Those are excellent statistics. And I also wanted to ask you now about Nigeria's status in the past as a busy transit country for illicit drugs. Can you tell us the current situation?
It hasn't changed much, but then what we notice now is that rather than coming directly to Nigeria now, they have some transit countries in West Africa, and then via the ECOWAS protocol, come by road. We are noticing that kind of a trend, or again still, to try to confuse us as to what their routes are. They are willing to go to Dubai, Ethiopia, change lanes, or do a relay procedure. The actual people who go to Brazil, for instance, to get cocaine, never bring them actually into Nigeria themselves. Other Nigerians leave from Nigeria to go and get them. But we have been doing very well. That is why that you do not see a rise in cocaine importation. And I must say, in collaboration with our counterparts outside Nigeria, foreign counterparts, we get a lot of information and we never let down when they tell us.
Sir, in regional and global alliances, how active has Nigeria been in terms of making sure that the trafficking of illegal drugs is stopped?
We have one of the most robust legal enforcement regimen in the whole world. I think that is what ECOWAS took a look and is tilting towards asking other ECOWAS member countries to take a look at what Nigeria has. Nigeria's law, as it pertains to trafficking and abuse, is good. It is what should be copied by other countries. We do not let down our partners. That is why they have the confidence in us. That is why on their own they give us capacity training. That is why they are willing to invest in some of their equipments at our airports and ports. And that is why they train us.
Thank you for that information. I want to ask another question in regards to NDLEA used to announce large seizures of illegal drugs and substances, but there seems to be a marked departure from that routine. Why is this so?
No, ma'am, I don't think you have been following up. We do that. Nothing has changed from what our reporting system. We seize them, but you remember there's a court procedure. It is only after through the whole court processes that are getting the court's mandate that we are allowed to destroy them. If you have been following, in 2017 we did quite light burning of the exhibits in our stock. Right now, if you should visit any of our command headquarters, you will see the exhibits that are awaiting court's decision before we can ban them.
Thank you for that. When you look at the challenges that the NDLEA is facing, especially around what you've done in the past, which is announcing these big drug busts, which you say you continue to do, what things are you doing around public education and sensitizing people around drug trafficking? These are programs that I've seen in the past, but I haven't seen lately. Have you continued to do these programs? And how successful have they been in actually sensitizing the public around the dangers of taking drugs and also of trafficking in drugs?
Actually, quite the contrary, ma'am. We have segmented the awareness component of our agency into bits, such that different target groups can be addressed. You now have the ones that attend to the primary and secondary schools, the ones that attend to the tertiary, the ones that deal with market women and motor parks, the ones that deal with civil society organizations, and the one that deals with professionals. Actually, you're going to be seeing now more engagement by the different segments of our agency attending to the particular needs of the different segments of the society, because we have realized that you cannot have one envelope, one blanket kind of mobilization and sensitization. You need to fragment it to address the needs of the different groups. We are doing it, we are on it. But of course, you know, whatever you do that it's governments is tied to the funding by the government. You know the dearth of funding in Nigerian economy. The president is doing his part to make sure that he makes funds available. As soon as he does that, you're going to see what we'll be doing.
So basically there is a funding, there's some funding limitations around these educational programs. Do you have any monitoring and evaluation? Do you have any idea around the impact that you're making with these programs?
First of all, let me say there is a monetary constraint all over the economy, which is a fact. You know, it has been salvaged. It's been salvaged, so that there are contending issues that require the government's attention. In due course, I'm sure we'll have our share. I tell you, most of those people that are in our rehab are not as a result of court sentences. These are people who come voluntarily to us because they trust and have seen what our drug demand reduction infantile assist, but how much it does to them.
I have another, just one question for you before I move on here. Last year in April, there was a school shooting. One of your operatives accidentally shot a student. I just wanted to know, that was an incident on Tapa Street in Lagos Island. What What have you put into place to avoid this? And can you tell us actually more about why this happened and how it happened?
Well, you have already reported it. You're in Lagos, you know what happened. If I have at least 50% of my men under arms, and for all this duration, you have isolated accidents of a mishap, we should be giving some credit to it. Not that any life lost is, should be discountenanced. No, we take the utmost care to drill our men as to how they should handle their weapons. But accidents will happen, and accidents have happened. We try to minimize it by giving the best training that we can. By the way, the matter is before the court, and the courts will make a final decision. It is not an intentional act by the agent you are talking about. If we shot any suspect on drugs, there will be a lot more people you find daily that have been shot.
Is this a process issue? Are there processes and procedures put in place to make sure this doesn't happen again? Can you tell us some more about the process and how you're making sure this doesn't happen again?
Well, generally, for any agency, from the military down, who handles weapons, there are particular ways, there are particular processes and standards as how you handle your weapon. Basically, what we do from paramilitary up is that there's a routine. It's like second nature to you, but accidents will still happen. So what we have just done is to restate and emphasize that they must go with the standards operating proceeding that have been laid out for weapon handling.
What about the protection?
It is precisely...
I was going to ask about the protection of your operatives during their field duty. What is the situation regarding loss of personnel?
Well, let me give you some statistics and you be the judge. The DEA in America was set up like some 91 years ago. 2 years ago, I was invited there. I took a look at the honor rolls that they have of the agents that they have lost. They have lost so far for 91 years, as at 2 years ago, 29 persons. The NDLEA, conversely, we have been working for 28 years and we have lost 67 people. Our collaborators have stepped in. They have been giving us some of the gadgets that we need for protection, and case has been made, and the government is looking into it.
What about the welfare of the spouses and families of those 67 personnel that were lost? What accommodation is made for that?
Remember first that we are government workers. The terms and conditions of service of any government worker is at the time of entry. I can tell you that whatever is theirs has been given them. We have not taken one kobo out of what is their rightful and lawful take.
To take you back to
I don't have one single family that's a...
To take you back to the issue of funding, you've inaugurated the Nigeria Drug Use Survey, which is funded by the EU. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, and it came out with some interesting, surprising results. The EU is funding many efforts on drug interdiction in Nigeria, like our other international collaborators, because of the UN and a general agreement that drug problem is a worldwide program. No one nation alone can solve it. So nations come together to aggregate and help even countries who can't do it, because you never know. The weak link in that chain of the fight is as good as how the fight will come out. That is why the EU is supporting us. The EU is supporting us. We like it. We appreciate it. But we are in our own, you know, we do make sure that we don't allow our nationals not only to go out and spoil our image, but they do not carry these drugs to occasion harm to their own citizens. So it's a win-win situation. We appreciate what they do, but they appreciate what we do to them too.
You mentioned the fact that countries like the EU are, like the EU is involved and looking back and forth. But I want to know, countries like the United States, they've taken in their law, they're looking at their issue when it comes to drugs, and they're changing the law, realizing that at the end of the day, not every drug or use of every drug should carry a hard sentence. In a country as Nigeria, we are growing. Are there any chances that we would also be looking at the way our drug laws are enforced and possibly making some changes to where everything doesn't carry the same sentence as far as usage of drug and transporting drug trafficking in the country?
Obviously, laws of any country are not immutable. With the coming of times, you see the rationale for changing the laws. But except you are specific about what aspect of our law needs to be changed, I do not think I can confidently talk generally about it. But if you mention what aspect of it you're talking about, I will tell you what the government is doing.
Well, what about personal use? What about, we know, for instance, the use of some drugs are helping with treatments for certain people, something about personal use as opposed to a harder drug?
Personal use of what?
Personal use, there is marijuana, which is used in the U.S. now as medicinal. And obviously in Nigeria, any drug that is used carries a hard sentence. Is something like that, is there a possibility that we could look into that as not having such a hard sentence for recreational use?
Two things. Let me say immediately, ma'am. Please correct the impression that marijuana is legalized in the U.S. In the whole of the U.S., there are only 5 states out of the 50 that permit some marijuana use, some for recreational use, some for medicines. And in every state, including those ones, all of the 50 states, it remains a federal offense.
But it is still being used in some states. So that brings me back to my question. Is there a possibility that it can affect or change the law?
Five out of 50 is not a good example.
All right, so let's move on from that. I think maybe part of what we were talking, going back to some of the things we were talking about earlier, right now there's the use of drug abuse is criminalized rather than rehabilitation. I think that's also some of the things that you've talked about earlier, which you're going to be looking at funding around, which you're hoping to get funding around rehabilitation and probably expanding some of your rehabilitation programs. I want us to move over now to some of the things we were talking about earlier in our discussions around Boko Haram. We know that we have very porous borders, and those borders have been used around drug trafficking, they have been used for weapon trafficking, and we also know that funds from illicit drugs have been used to fund some of these insurgencies, terrorism. How are you working with these different agencies, especially our security forces, to first of all look at how some of the illicit drug funding is funding insurgency and possibly terrorism, but also what work are you doing in the ECOWAS region around the porosity of our borders, and how are you working with those different agencies there?
We do have a forum for heads of drug law enforcement agencies in Africa only. We have a smaller one for West Africa. We meet and we compare notes. I can assure you and tell you straight now, there is no country that wants drugs to be available in its country, either for use of the citizens or to send to other countries to harm them. So exchange of information and intelligence is rapid and rampant amongst us. And I can tell you, the Nigerian military in the theater of operations in both Boko Haram and the river areas have, like you have alluded to, seized, seen paraphernalia of drug use that have been that they have met at those camps of Iran, which goes to show, at least, if not for their dastardly acts, at least they used it for their own consumption, which gives them the kind of courage to do inhumanly things that they do. So, if as much as we can strengthen our interdiction efforts to make sure they do not get their hands on this, the better it is going to be for the country, the better it's going to be for our troops, such that people don't live on borrowed courage and harm Nigerians. By the way, it's not only Boko Haram. The kidnapping, the violent crimes that you have in Nigeria all over are predicated upon the use of illegal drugs. You need to check the statistics with the police and the prisons. They will confirm what I've told you.
What is the NDLEA doing to curb the menace of tramadol in Nigeria?
Well, from 2017 till now, you know, we have been on top of our game. From November, December 2017, when one of our very important collaborators gave us the hint that there were 9 containers coming to Nigeria that contained tramadol, we were ready for them at the port. Out of the 9, 6 of them contained tramadol pills to the tune of 180 million. Since then, we have had more containers. We have liaised with customers to inform them accurately. The containers that were searched in November, December last year, and the pills that was got 580 million were the ones that we were informed. We were the ones that let the nation know that those containers were under our watch. Right now, we still have some 29 more containers. But I can tell you, our linkage between the source country and Nigeria has been strengthened, and it has. We are the first port of call for that information about whatever tramadol is coming into Nigeria. By the way, if you are familiar with the markets of tramadol in Nigeria, you will discover that it has spiked up by 2,000%, which shows that it's not readily available in the market again.
I just want to follow up on this question. Earlier in our discussion with you, you said there are 2 ways to sort of the NDLEA is looking at working. One is boots on the ground, and one is technology. As technology becomes much more proliferated, people are using technology to make these connections around even drug sales, to find buyers and sellers. How are you infiltrating that, and what are you doing around technology to use technology? I mean, especially in cases like tramadol, where you were able to know where things were coming from and where it's going. How are you using technology?
We are beneficiaries of technology that other countries use. To that extent, we use technology. Someday, I hope we'll get to that. But like you read in my CV, I attend Interpol meetings, I attend the Pompidou Group, I attend the IDEC meeting sponsored by the DA, I attend the Holy and several other ones. That's where we share our information. Those countries that are a little bit ahead of us in terms of the use of technology let us in on some of the facts and findings that they have for the benefit of our people. That's the ones that we use now. But we are not relenting, because drug abuse is a national security issue. No country concerns its own national security to the whims and caprices of another country. While we appreciate what other countries are doing for us, I think time will come when we will do it ourselves. In fact, the time is now.
Sir, to what extent has Nigeria domesticated international conventions on hard drugs?
I will shock you. Nigeria has been an honest and diligent compliance of the UN Convention. Surprise, surprise. 1931, even when we were a colonial country, we signed the first convention. We have signed every convention of the UN, and we have been diligently keeping to the dictates of all of them. Nigeria's record as far as compliance is well known. That is why, let me go back to your question on cannabis. Go and take a look at the last meeting of the UNODC in Vienna, Austria. Nigeria is in the forefront, insisting that cannabis must not be taken off the list of drugs that should be liberalized, because it is one of the cardinal rules of one of the conventions that it is a drug that must be under control. So countries may elect to do it on their own, but the convention says it must be controlled. So we don't walk outside the mandate of the convention that we have willingly signed.
Thank you for shocking us.
Yes, that was a pleasant shock. Now, just yesterday, the NDLEA did a drug bust in Ibadan where they uncovered a lab that was manufacturing squishy, as it's known on the street. What is the role of the public in assisting your duties? How can the public be encouraged to give these tips about illegal drug labs, drug trafficking, and other crimes?
I assume you're part of the public. By giving me a shot at your station today, I hope that you bring us on more often and on your own. Send out jingles. I know you can make some. If you can't, we'll give you some of the ones that we have and do it for us. Do it gratis. We'll appreciate it.
One, just following up on some of the use of illicit drugs. One of the areas that has seen an increased use of illicit drugs is, besides the youth population due to unemployment, is actually housewives. I know you've said that you have specific programs targeting them. What other programs and what organizations are you working with, especially because this is a demographic that is, this is a new demographic that is now using drugs. What programs are you doing for housewives, and how are you working with other agencies to actually stem the use among housewives?
If you follow our beat, you will discover that specific to states, now that you mentioned housewives, I assume you're talking about the prevalence of the abuse of cough syrup with codeine in Kano. We are working completely in tandem with the elites, the money people, the traditional rulers, the government, the civil society, all name it in Kano. The NDLEA office there is working completely with them. In Oyo, we are doing something slightly different. Because of the prevalence of cannabis plantations, cannabis farms, cannabis plantation, we have the ones that we have busted and burnt down. The government of Oyo State has stepped in to convert that portion into a poultry, a fishery, and engage the natives around who were hitherto on the cannabis plantation. Now they are, in other words, kind of offering some sort of sustainable alternative development for the natives around there. We might be going to Thailand again with the government of Ekiti State after seeing the success of Oyo. Maybe they want to borrow a leaf. If you know about the Mayfair Leong Foundation in Thailand, it happens to be the incubator of sustainable alternative development for the UN. The UN recommends that countries go and see how Thailand was able to convert its poppy field into coffee and tea plantations and some rural cottage industries.
Before, I know we have another question, but before we go to that, actually, in talking about plantations and talking about boots on the ground, if you look at the history of cannabis in Nigeria, cannabis was first brought back by the soldiers that after the Second World War, and they brought these back, and they've been cannabis has been growing across the country. With the limited number of people you have, how actually do you get your boots on the ground into these plantations, and have you guys had any successes? I think it's known as Indian hemp on the street.
Not to have listened. Yeah, you appear not to have listened to what I told you. The president has already approved an increase of 15,000 personnel. That will go a long way.
Sorry, sir, I did. Sorry, sir, I did pay attention. Sorry, sir, I did pay attention to how many people you have added, but you haven't added them yet, obviously because of budget reasons. So I'm trying to understand your success on the ground when it comes to plantations specifically.
Well, we do it the old way, the way we have been doing it. We're informants, our patrols, and lately, I think we want to introduce some drones.
Okay.
So there was a lot of reports about the NDLEA's activities in Onitsha and Kano markets. What is the current status of that?
I don't understand Onitsha and Kano markets.
Yes, that the NDLEA was active in those areas.
I think working with NAFDAC around codeine and
to curtail the drug menace in those areas.
Okay, let's get it straight. The NDLEA goes only after drugs that have been registered and named by the government as illicit, illegal. So whatever the government so says, it can add to the list, it can reduce to it. The reason why we seize cough syrup with codeine is because there's a kind of moratorium on its consumption until the government decides exactly where we go. So we are not in the business of going to chemists just to start checking medicines. That is not our mandate.
No, that's NAFDAC. Yes,
drugs,
that's NAFDAC. I wasn't
drugs.
Suggesting that at all.
Good.
Yes. And there's also been allegations
but if we...
Sorry, please, sir, continue.
Okay, but if, that is not to say that if perfectly legal medicinal companies engage in illegal manufacture of illegal substances, they'll be let off the hook.
Thank you for that clarification. What do you say to the allegations that there's collusion between some of your officers and drug barons in Nigeria and internationally?
I'd like for you to take a look at the word baron after this program. Maybe you might use the word less openly next time. A baron is a specific kind of person. If there's a baron, everybody will know there's a baron. Don't confuse traffickers with barons. Barons have a chain, they have a long tail that cannot be hidden. As an issue of collusion, there are bad eggs in every organization. I don't pretend that we are all saints there, but I tell you what I tell people who make that allegation. If you do know some, bring them to me. Count on me to do what is right and hold me accountable. If I don't, say it on your TV.
The word baron is not to ascribe nobility or fame. It's probably a reference to the wealth that these people acquire. But yes, of course, I take your point that they are traffickers. But the amount of wealth that they acquire is why they're probably referred to as barons. Veronica?
Yes.
No, ma'am. And the chain on armies that they have working for them. So they cannot hide their trail. You become a baron, you are so obvious. If we don't get you, we'll get your tail.
All right. Well, I mean, I think that's...
But if you do know one baron, if you know a baron, please, let me know.
I most assuredly do not.
We don't know any.
We don't know anybody. But, sir, I mean, I think that one of the things that you've been very eloquent in today is really telling us about some of the work you've been doing, your initiatives, a lot of successes. Tell us about some of your pain points and what you're doing to meet those needs.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
I said what you've been very eloquent in telling us today is a lot of your successes, a lot of the areas you're working in. But one of the things we still, besides the funding, what are the things that you need the people to do? What are your pain points, and how are you meeting those, and what can the public do today? People are watching. Tell the public what they can do to help you. What are your pain points in running the NDLEA?
I think we have a precursor already on one of the immediate things I'd like Nigerians to help. There is the whistleblowing concept that is working with the EFCC. I want people to take us into confidence. We don't have the money to give, but as your civic responsibility, as a responsible Nigerian, as somebody who cares for Nigeria, if you have any information, anybody trying to cut the life of young Nigerians, trying to pollute our environment, because that's what some of these industries do, please take us into confidence. If we're not able to compensate you, at least you know you have helped your nation. Well, that's a civic responsibility. That's the first one. And then we can say that for corporate organizations like you now, who can, like I have mentioned, jingles, advice for us, come to us. We have specific needs that we need to pass on to the people, but we can't afford it. There are other corporate organizations. I see them donate cars to police, to was this national, the police particularly, I believe that part of the work we do in other countries is police work. I think those people should come into our aid. The government can't do everything. But precisely what I would like Nigerians to know, even though the laws and the agency is a federal engagement, but the citizens are indeed local. The citizens belong to states. So governors should take interest in what happens to their citizens, because they are the very people they go to for their votes. They should safeguard this youthful population that we have. You said 65%, which is accurate, because they are the future voters. Their votes will count, if not for them, but for their party in future. They should take an interest. Like I said, the Kano people, I think, are doing a wonderful job. They are all together in sync, all facets of their population. I think people should learn from Kano. Well,
retired Colonel Muhammad Abdallah, Chairman and CEO NDLEA, thank you very much for all your insights.
Thank you, sir. We hope to have you back.
Yes.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
It's time now for a short break.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's time now for a short break. When we return, PDP chieftain and former Minister of Education, Osita Chidoka, will be joining us to review the interview session between broadcast journalist Kadaria Ahmed and PDP presidential candidate Atiku Abubakar and his running mate, Peter Obi. Stay with us.